everybody, Mike Iaconelli back out here in the shop with a brand new video for you today. And in today's shop, we're going to have a little timely topic, and we're going to be talking about tail spinners. That's right, guys, tail spinners. You know, the interesting thing about this category is it's one of those lures that's really forgotten about. You know, in the advent of today's age, where techniques like swim baits, finesse techniques, walking baits, all these lures are getting a lot of attention, some of these older ones are really forgotten about. And the tail spinner is one. So first things first, let's look at a tail spinner. And I'll give you a breakdown on how simple yet effective this bait is. So when we're talking about a tail spinner, we're basically talking about a piece of lead that has a hook, it has a place to tie your line, and it has a tail spinner on the back, an actual spinner on the rear of the bait. If you're an old guy like me, you remember some of the originals, like the Little George by Mans. And, you know, when you look at that thing, it's very simple construction, but this thing is so effective under a lot of situations for triggering fish. You know, one of the things that a tail spinner has that's unique is it has kind of two actions at once. If you look at that body, it almost kind of looks like a rattle trap or a lipless crankbait style body, right? A baitfish bluegill looking shape to it. And the body in itself has a little bit of a movement to it, a little shake. So you have vibration of the body, and then of course you have the vibration and flash in that tail. And that's really one of the keys on a tail spinner is the spinner itself. Flash, vibration, plus the body movement and vibration, two movements, one lure. That's a big reason this thing's really good. The other reason a tail spinner versus some other lures is really good is control. Control. All right, what do I mean by control? Let me give you an example. Crankbait. You throw a crankbait out there, that lure only dives to the depth of that bill, right? It only dives to whatever that bill is taking it to. Top water stays on top. Carolina rig sinks to the bottom and stays on the bottom, right? A jig, you know, baits like that. But because the tail spinner is relatively heavy for its size, it sinks. And using our retrieve and our rod, and we're going to talk about it as we get into the different types of retrieves, we have an amazing amount of control with that bait. So we can keep it high, we can fish it in the middle of the water column, we could even fish it on the bottom and pop it or drag it on the bottom. So we control the level at which that tail spinner goes, right? Where it goes in the water column. So a lot of reasons why this thing is great. Going to give you one last reason, and then we're going to start talking about the timing of it. When, where, and then we'll get into the how. So one last thing on the tail spinner is when you look at that, you see that single treble hook. And I know immediately when I saw Little George 100 years ago, I thought, oh God, this thing's going to be terrible in cover. It's going to be horrible. Guys, the opposite is true. When you look at this bait, because it has a single belly hook and because of the design of that bait, so give you a look at, this is, by the way, this is a Mullex Trago spin tail. And the Mullex tail spinner, the best way I can describe it is it's a modern, souped up version of the old tail spinners, right? So the old tail spinners, the basic skeleton's the same, but this is a tricked out version, okay? So when you look at this Molex Trago spin tail, you're going to see a very broad front. You're going to see a very flat, broad chin to it. And when you tie this bait on, guys, here's how it comes through the water. It comes through the water head down. And that single treble, you know, listen, rattle trap, 2 trebles, dude, that thing gets caught a lot. But a single belly treble, because it's nose down, really deflects off cover really, really well. So, you know, this thing coming across isolated pieces of wood, it comes through great because the nose is deflecting. The single treble hook on the belly is sort of hidden. It deflects off wood extremely well. Rock, bridge pilings, dams, seawalls, hitting off of that concrete or rock comes through extremely well. Even grass, guys, even grass, because just like a rattle trap has that same kind of thinner body, and when I'm fishing this thing through grass, you're going to hear me talk about it later, I snap it, and remember, single treble hook on the belly, so there's not a treble hook catching grass. That treble hook's protected by the body, and that shape allows me to snap it through the grass. So the last great feature of a tail spinner is it comes through cover a lot better than what you would think. All right, let's talk about the whens and wares. And dude, it is a bait that I will fish year-round. I'll fish it in the spring, especially in the pre-spawn. I will fish it in the summer, especially in the heat of the summer when the fish are deep or the fish are schooling. I love it. I'll fish it in the fall when they're feeding on bait fish. I need to make really long casts. I'll fish it. But 100%, and this is where this timeliness of this shop comes in, this is an amazing lure from the late fall to the winter. Guys, when fish get deeper and when fish are really slowing down, when they're getting more lethargic, and you're targeting these fish that are deeper and more lethargic, this is a bait that's always tied on my rod. You know, a jig and spoon, a metal blade bait, and that. When that water gets cold, late fall and winter, they're always tied on one of my rods, okay? So the wen, pretty broad. Outside of when fish are spawning, outside of when fish are on the beds, this thing can be a player. Where is pretty broad, okay? I've had success on a tail spinner schooling fish in Florida on the Toho Kissimmee chain in the heat of the summer. You know, super deep on Lake George, 70, 80 foot, you know, in the early pre-spawn, you know, all the way to shallower zones, you know, mid-depth in that late fall period. It's good in a lot of different bodies of water. So clear water, super clear water, stained water, even dirty water, this thing can be good. And remember, it's a twofer bait, so you've got body movement and you've got flash and vibration. And because of that vibration, even in dirtier water, this thing can still be a player. Okay, sizes and colors, and then we're going to get into the technique. Sizes and colors. Dude, if you look at my blade bait box real quick, and this is just a good look at, these are all that Molex Trago spin tail. I carry like 3 basic colors. I carry my whites and my silvers. I carry gold, and then I carry ones that have almost a perch or a bluegill look to them, okay? So there's a good look at a perchy looking one. There's a good look at a silvery one, and I also like the pearl whites, guys. So bluegill, silver, or pearl or white. And then last but not least, one of my favorites is, if I can get it out, is gold. That's it. So I don't carry a ton of colors in these tailspins. I carry those basic colors to imitate the forage. Just like anything that we're doing with any other bait, I want the basic forage colors. Sizes, same thing. Look at this box. I'm carrying from that little tiny 1/4 ounce tail spinner all the way up to that big one, which is the 3/4 ounce tail spinner, relatively heavy. But with sizes, 100% guys, a 3/8 and a 1/2 ounce are the sizes I use a lot. So 1/4, 3/8, 1/2 ounce, and 3/4. And really the size to mimic bait, but more than that, picking the weight to get to that zone you're fishing. So the 1/4, a lot better shallower, 3/4, super deep, and the 3/8 and 1/2 are really my workhorses because, again, control. I could take a 3/8 ounce tail spinner and fish it in a foot of water, burning it on top for schooling fish, or I could fish it in 20 and 30, light jigging it on the bottom because I control it based on what I do with my rod. So that's weight. All right, let's get to the techniques. And I'm going to give you my 4 basic techniques that I use with the tail spinner. But let me tell you, maybe like a soft stick bait, there's a lot of other ways you could fish it. But I'm going to give you my top 4. And then last but not least, after we talk about this, I'm going to talk about rods and reels a little bit. But I'm going to give you my top 4 with this tail spinner. The way that I'm going to break it down, we'll do it by zones, and I'm going to give you 1 for the top, 1 for the middle, and then I'm going to give you 2 for fish that are toward the bottom. And that's really the juice. If you're watching this and you're in that late fall or wintertime period, these last 2 that are toward the bottom are really the juice. But let's start with a tail spinner near the surface. And listen, if you're watching this, if fish are busting or schooling near the surface, this is a player. And you know, the reason is simple, because those schooling type fish that are busting, they're active, they're chasing, but you need to hit the jumps. We call it jump fishing. Even if you're like a striper guy or you fish saltwater, you know about the jumps. And a lot of times you'll see them, you'll see birds, and the ability to get that lure right where the boiling is happening is key. That's one of the reasons this is such a good lure to fish for fish that are near the surface. So the 3/8, the 1/2 ounce, on a bait caster, on a spinning, whatever you rather fish, dude, I can chuck this thing a country mile. And the real basic easy technique is when I see the jumps, when I see those fish schooling, I try to cast it into the schooling activity or just past it. And when I say just, like just a little bit past it. And I keep my rod super high. It's up there at about 1 o'clock. And I'm burning it and pumping it. And all that thing's doing, if you could imagine, that lure's jumping through that activity. And as it jumps through that surface activity, that tail spinner is flashing and vibrating. And they can't get a good look at it. And when they can't get a good look at it, they come up and attack it, and you've got them. It's an amazing hookup percentage because it's got an exposed treble. And they'll come up and hit it, eat it. You get them in the mouth, you get them in the gill plate, you get them in the head, but you get them. Unlike a topwater where they knock it out of the water, or a fluke where they mouth the tail. Dude, if they go at this thing to get it, single treble, in their face, okay? In their mouth, in their face, in their head. So the first technique toward the surface is for schooling fish. 1 o'clock, burning it, pumping it. As soon as I'm out of that schooling fish, I'll burn it back in and try to hit them again. Hit them again. Long cast are key. All right, number 2 is for fish that are in the middle of their water column. Fish that are suspended, fish that are feeding in the middle of the water column. It's a great alternative to a crankbait or a jerkbait. I'm getting back to it again. The reason is control. If I'm trying to fish that crankbait for suspended fish in the middle of the water column, this thing only dives so deep. And once it hits that diving depth, I'm stuck there. So I can't really go higher. I can't really go lower. It's stuck in that zone. Same thing with a jerkbait, right? Think about it. A lipped jerkbait, suspending jerkbait, shallow or deep. Once you reel it and start jerking it, it's stuck there. 3 to 4 feet, 5 to 8 feet, 7, whatever. It's stuck there. But for fish that are in that middle of the water column, dude, I have the control. And based on my rod positioning and the speed at which I reel it, I have the control, okay? And I love that. So the second technique for tail spinner, guys, is to cast it past where those fish are. And I'm using my sonar, forward-facing sonar a lot to determine the level of the fish. When it hits the water, I'm counting it down to that level. So I make that long cast, I'll count it down to the level. And once it's there, I'm going to fish it a lot like a crankbait. I'm going to reel it. And remember what I said, dual action bait. So you've got a little bit of body movement, sort of like a rattle trap. But more importantly, as I'm reeling that bait, that blade is flashing and vibrating and spinning. And that becomes the trigger for these fish in the middle, okay? So I'm just reeling it like I would a crankbait. And I'm trying to reel it to the level of the fish or the level of the bait. The one thing I do is, like a crankbait, when I want to get it to deflect, as I'm reeling it, every once in a while, I'll pop it. And when I pop it, I'll show you. I just kind of give it a pop. And then when I give it a pop, I bow to it. And then I pick my retrieve back up. So let's call it every 15 to 20 cranks of the reel handle. I'll pop it, throw slack into it, and then reel again. And all that's doing, you can imagine, it's got that steady flash and vibration. It's got that body movement. And when I pop it, it pops up a little, falls, and hits that speed again. And that's a good trigger sometimes when the fish are more lethargic. So tail spinner when the fish are in the middle of the water column. And real quick, those surface fish that are schooling, fall, early fall, fall feed, heat of the summer, great time for the surface. Middle, pre-spawn, early summer, when fish are in the middle of the water column. But now, let's get to my last two with the tail spinner. And this is for when fish are deeper and when they're getting more lethargic toward the bottom. Heat of the summer is a great one, but late fall and winter is really when these tail spinners start getting a workout with these last two techniques, okay? So the first one is the yo-yo technique. And, you know, if you've watched my shops, you know that I'm a big fan of the yo-yo technique for lipless crankbaits, like rattle trap style lures. Big fan of that style. But honestly, using a tail spinner, yo-yoing it, is even better. And the reason is, and I'm going to show you how I do it, but the reason is when I lift, it vibrates and flashes on the lift. But when it falls, it's got a shimmy and that blade helicopters down. And that blade helicoptering as that bait's falling does something different than a rattle trap. does something different than a metal blade bait. Does something different than an ice jig or a spoon. The flash and the cup really trigger those fish, and it mimics a bait fish dying, right? If that was a shad dying, he's got that thump as he's dying. And that helicoptering motion really triggers that bite. All right, so here's your yo-yo. And it is exactly like I would yo-yo a rattle trap. I make that cast, long cast, out to the level of the fish, and I'm going to let it sink to the bottom. Once it hits the bottom, I'm going to take my rod from about 3 o'clock, and I'm going to lift it to 12, and then as I go back to 3, I'm going to follow a semi-slack line. That's the most important key part to this, guys, is following that semi-slack line. So letting it hit the bottom, following it down, boom. The line bellows out, it's hit the bottom. I'm going to take that rod and I'm going to lift. And real quick, the colder the water, the slower those lifts. The hotter the water in the summer, the more rapid those lifts. But late fall, winter, guys, listen, I'm lifting like this. Ready? I'm lifting like lift, and then following that semi-slack back down, boom, the lure hits the bottom. Late fall and winter, when that water's cold, slower lifts, right? So 3 to 12, so to 12, following that slack back down, boom, hits the bottom. So that bait lifting and falling, yo-yoing, and that tail spinner helicoptering down as you follow that semi-slack line back down. Dude, a lot of bites come when those fish are toward the bottom. They eat it. It's a big trigger. Okay, so yo-yoing is the third technique. Last but not least, and again, summertime, heat of the summer when fish get deeper, out on the ledges, on the points, or late fall and winter, which is what's going on right now. This thing is phenomenal when slow rolled along the bottom. You know, the main reason I think that this thing can outproduce, let's say, a spinner bait or even a chatterbait is its compact size. You know, look at this bait compared to, you know, a big spinner bait, right? Smaller profile. When that water, especially late fall and winter, gets cold, they're not eating big giant bait anymore. They're eating easier, smaller meals. So slow rolling, this bait is better because of the size, but let me get back to the design of that mullet spintail bait. Broad front, flat bottom. When I'm slow rolling this, I'm literally crunching it along the bottom, and it's deflecting off of whatever cover that is. Especially in the late fall and winter, guys, gravel, chunk rock, boulders. I like that harder bottom in the winter. When I'm slow rolling it, it's just coming through, deflecting, and the whole way that tail spinner is moving. This is the beauty of this tail spinner, is that spinner, okay? So last one, guys, slow rolling. Just like if you've watched other shops, you know, you've heard me talk about it before. Super long cast out to where I believe the fish are. I'm letting it fall to the bottom. Boom. The lure hits my line bellows out. The lure hits the bottom. Once I get there, I'm going to put that rod at about 2 o'clock, and I'm just barely going to reel it. I'm just going to slow roll it. Just nice, slow, steady retrieve. Every 20, 25 cranks, I'm going to stop, pause, follow the bait, let it hit the bottom again. Boom, hits the bottom. Slow roll it on the bottom. When those fish get lethargic, summer, but more importantly, late fall and winter, that slow roll tail spinner is a killer. All right, real quick, guys, talk about the rod and the reel and the setup for this tail spinner. You can use it on spinning or casting, but I really prefer this technique on a casting rod. My preferred rod is 7 to 7.2 at the longest, but I really, really like a 7-foot medium heavy rod. 7-foot medium heavy. Gives me a lot of control, allows me to make long casts with that little MH tip, right? It's got a little whip to it, but it has a lot of backbone. So when they eat it, I can set the hook and get them to the boat. So 7-foot medium heavy casting rod. Real, guys, I just like a middle of the road gear ratio. Not super slow, not super fast. With these 4 techniques I talked about, even the burning of a middle of the road retrieve is fine. 7-1 to 1, 7-3 to 1, it's perfect, okay? Middle of the road retrieve is fine. And then last but not least is the line. You know, even in deep water, this bait, because think about that body roll that we talked about and that tail spinning. And I want control. I want the bait to sink and sink quick to where I want it. Because of that, I don't like the braid because braid parachutes. It takes action out of the bait, but it takes the control away from me. And because of that, I prefer to fish a tail spinner on straight fluorocarbon. I really like that 12 to 20 pound test, but if I had to pick one, 15 pound Berkley trilene fluorocarbon is great for all those sizes. The quarter, 3/8, half, which are my workhorses, and even the 3/4, 15 pound fluorocarbon, it's Berkley trilene fluorocarbon, is the deal. You can use it on spinning. That's my preferred setup. Man, I hope you enjoyed this shop talking about the tail spinner, one of the most forgotten lures out there. Old school lure, new school design, and it still catches a ton of fish. If you like what you're watching here on these shops, do me a favor, hit the subscribe button. Subscribe to my channel. If you're already subscribed, tell your friends about Mike Iaconelli Fishing. If you're a subscriber, we're going to send you a notification, and hopefully you'll become a better fisherman and learn more about this awesome sport. I hope you like this one, talking about the tail spinner. Hey everybody, Mike Iaconelli. I hope you enjoyed this week's In the Shop. I hope you learned a little bit. And if you like these videos, remember, there's a whole boatload. Check out these 2, and you're going to learn more about bass fishing.